Welcome to FM Radio, your go-to podcast for everything in the world of funds management. Whether you're an experienced advisor, a seasoned investor, or just starting your journey, we're here to break down the complex world of funds management, all in a way that makes sense. Each episode, we'll talk to the experts to get their insights on everything from asset allocation to risk management and give you the inside track on how decisions are made. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about the future of advice and investment in Australia. Is the industry navigating a few challenges, or are we headed for a new golden age? Here to help us explore that topic is Elston Co-Founder Andrew McKie. Hi Andrew, welcome to the show.
Hey Pete, how are you?
I'm good. I have to say you're looking well. In fact, you seem to be looking younger every time I see you. Just recently, somebody showed me a photo from the early days, from quite a way back in your industry experience. It must be like a Dorian Gray thing. I'm sure that photo is getting older and you're getting younger.
Benjamin Button, you reckon? Must be the red wine.
You've definitely discovered the secret of eternal youth. Anyway, despite appearances, I also, you were telling me the other day that in 2028, Elston will be hitting its 20th birthday. So you've been around for a while.
Started as a child prodigy when I was 12 or something, Pete. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. That must be how it works. Almost 20 years. You've obviously seen a lot happen in the industry over that time. What are some of the things that have, I guess, really shaken the industry up and created a few challenges and opportunities for advisors over those sort of 2 decades? What really stands out to you?
I think the industry, when you look back over time, particularly the financial planning industry, really came out of insurance advice. We go right back to the beginning. It was insurance agents that started providing advice on superannuation as it came out, as a product, as one of their product toolkits, if you like. And you may be aware, but your life insurance is often held within your superannuation pool. So we've seen an industry that I think would say it's a cottage industry, but it perhaps was not as formalised as a profession, perhaps. And then there's also been a situation where you've had huge financial incentives because you've got this big asset pool, that's attracted people to the industry, can be sometimes not the best people attracted to that. And obviously there can be conflicts of interest that can come between, say, advisors or other participants in the industry and people's money. And so I think what we've seen and probably what ultimately happened with the Royal Commission is that in 2018 is some of that coming to light, but potentially there is a need to recognise that there are conflicts of interest when you're dealing with people's money, that there are significant pools of assets, that the advice industry has a fiduciary duty to their client, that often it's their life savings that they're putting in place with them. GFC, Storm Financial, they're trigger events that require a regulator or someone to come in and start to look at the structure of an industry. And we saw that again in 2018.
And obviously these changes, as you said, they were well overdue. They needed to happen, but it did knock the numbers around of advisors as well.
That's where it came to professional standards, educational requirements and so on. And so people that weren't prepared to meet those obligations exited the industry, and we saw a contraction in the number of advisors. At the same time, though, also seen institutions, universities bring in more formal qualifications around advice, tertiary qualifications with majors specifically in financial planning. And that, I think, has meant that a younger, more professional demographic has actually been attracted to the industry. They've probably seen what's happened in 2008, seen the industry is being cleaned up, for want of a better word, and is more professional, one that they would want to get involved in. And I think that's a great thing too that's come out of it.
Yeah, I was reading that, looking at the numbers, that probably around the time of the new legislation coming in from ASIC in 2019, there was probably a peak of about 26,000 or more people who were in the advice industry, and then it probably bottomed out, I guess, in 2022 to about 10,000. So it's a major correction. As you said, a lot of those people needed to move outside the scope of advice. We want to move to a higher standard of professionalism, but it probably has bottomed out. Now we're attracting a new breed of people who are happy to take on that higher standard, who want to embrace that higher standard. And the tertiary offering is allowing that to happen. In fact, that's probably flourishing.
And I think, those people see it as part of the natural thing that you would do when you're a professional industry. You have the base fundamentals for, any industry is based on education of some degree. So I don't see that as being something that's a hurdle for that. The advice numbers are growing. So advice numbers are increasing. And some of the challenges have been overcome and potentially will be overcome. A lot of those smaller practices have gone also by the wayside because one of the byproducts of the Royal Commission from a bad thing, if you own an advice business, is the cost of actually providing advice went up dramatically. And so, that meant that very small boutique advice firms really didn't have the scale to sustain themselves. And then a lot of institutions withdrew themselves from the advice industry, as you mentioned earlier, and there wasn't that cross-subsidisation of the business model through product. They could no longer receive a product, say, commission, which might sustain an otherwise unviable advice practice, so through the licensee. So there's been a lot of upheaval as well from a structural perspective of how the industry is actually structured.
Yeah. I mean, you think about it, it's an evolution, but it all happened really rapidly.
Yep.
It had to happen. If Paul Keating was referring back to the financial industry, he'd say that's the change we had to have happen. And probably, as you said, we've come out stronger as an industry because of it. The advice industry still obviously faces lots of other challenges. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do well in. The good people do well, and the people who are, smart about it. I saw a survey from Money Management in 2024, and they were talking about, I think they surveyed about 260 advisors and talked about what are some of the major challenges you're facing. Some of them actually overlap with really what it is to run a business. But it's interesting, the top of the list, 91% said that it was the cost-based pressures. How hard it was to be profitable if you didn't have things running smoothly. So I think that's an ongoing issue, even coming through the other side of the legislation. Yeah,
I'll make a point there too in terms of when we talk to our clients who are advice practice owners, typically, and advisors, this is still an ongoing issue. Sometimes when these regulatory changes occur, they can go too far. The pendulum swings too far and becomes not practical, from an implementation point of view. And there needs industry consultation to maybe get back to a more, manageable area. I think that's what's been occurring. Maybe the stick was, too big, if you like, and then that caused a lot of the economics of an actual advice business to be disrupted significantly. And where that's bad is the supply of advice. So what it's meant is the cost of delivering advice to someone makes it prohibitive for a lot of people to actually receive advice. So there's this nexus around, yes, you want to have regulation. Yes, you've got to have professional standards. But you also need to be able to deliver advice to people if they want it. And it has to be affordable and practices have to be profitable in order to sustain that advice, to a client and service that and look after that client over the long term.
And one other thing that came through the survey was interesting was I think this is probably a universal problem for any business is keeping up with technology and recruitment. I mean, I think they are – you were talking before about, of course, recruitment would be so hard when the number of advisors have exited the industry, but we've got this new generation, the next breed of advisors coming through. But that's obviously two major challenges that they do face. I mean, technology, I think we're all kind of going, it's a challenge. It's also a massive opportunity if I get it right. But recruitment is obviously an ongoing issue for advice firms.
Yeah. The number of advisors are increasing, the advisor numbers are increasing, but it's not like it's growing at a very high rate. So, and yet the unmet need for advice is quite significant. So we have the demand pool, we have a limited supply pool, if you like, and that means price goes up as well. And that also is the, cost of actually employing an advisor and finding an advisor, all those things. And that flows through, again, to the cost of delivery advice. One of the issues has also been the delivery advice post-Royal Commission, just the compliance obligation. And we've seen that, we've been very fortunate in a way and benefiting from those constraints because people need to find solutions that are scalable to be able to deliver advice. And that's where obviously SMA and SMA platforms reduce the cost of actual delivery of advice and they improve the scale economics for a practice. Because there is no choice at some point. You have to make sure the business is sustainable so you can continue to look after clients. If your advisors are spent most of their time doing compliance work, that means they're not talking to clients and really providing the advice for what the client's actually paying for. Clients expect you to be compliant. They don't pay for compliance as such. And so there's been these scale economics, these constraints on advice industries, and that's really for them flowing into, well, what are we going to do technology-wise to deliver scale economics and the delivery of advice so we can continue to look after clients well.
Yeah, so it's not as if we're talking about, gloom and doom out there. We're talking about adaptability and people embracing the opportunities and changing the model and making it work. And in fact, you've actually got probably, I remember you were on stage at a Livewire event recently and you were painting a pretty rosy picture of the future. In that presentation, you talk about Australia not being just the lucky country, but you put forward the idea that maybe we're poised to become the luckiest country. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, just the future growth in wealth in Australia, probably driven by superannuation as a start, as a cascading effect into property values and all asset prices, really, because that money's got to go somewhere. But between now and 2040, going from $4 trillion to $10 trillion, population's not increasing by that much over that period of time. So you can see the effect on wealth. And that means that from an advice industry perspective, you've got these needs that must be fulfilled. You'll have an aging demographic, which will lead to intergenerational wealth transfer. You've got complexity in the system. We have one of the, most complex tax regimes. And if you look at superannuation legislation, it's confusing, to say the least. So the need for advice to navigate that is very important, especially if you have larger asset pools. So, we have these issues to navigate, but they are tremendous opportunities for the advice industry. Probably the one that I didn't speak about at that time is that there will be some reforms, that pendulum moving back to the sensible centre when it comes to practical delivery of advice and the client experience. There will be some change there as regulators consult with industry. And if we combine that simplification of advice with the opportunities from automation, AI and automation, means that there is another dimension to the opportunity for an advice practice. So I think I said at the time, because of the pools of assets, the need for advice, these top-down thematics like, household wealth and intergenerational wealth transfer, that whatever you do, don't sell your practice, because it's probably going to go up in value, let's face it. And equally, don't sell your asset management business either, because it's probably going to go up in value over time. How can it not? But what I didn't mention at that time was this technology overlay, which clearly has happened over that period of time with ChatGPT and people starting to look at automation more broadly.
Yeah, it's interesting to see where that would take us, and you can only imagine it's moving at such a rapid pace that it's actually probably hard to pull out the crystal ball and say this is where it's going. Get a general idea of the opportunities it can deliver. It's interesting when you were talking before about the pendulum maybe returning slightly back to centre, and as an industry, some of the discussions around that to bring it to some more of, I guess, a sensible positioning.
Yep.
Do you have a bit of a feeling about how that might be slightly modified, or how we might return slightly to the sensible middle?
Well, I think the initial advice document is probably one that needs to be reviewed. You've got what I would call financial planning by the kilo. When you look at someone who receives an advice document, it might be 100 pages, 50 to 100 pages long. Who reads that? So people want to understand the principles of what's required for them to do from a strategy perspective, but it needs to also be very clear and simple for people, so they have trust in the advice that they're receiving. So I think that would be an area that needs work clearly, and that probably will come out of quality advice review. The other thing, talking to a lot of practice owners, the obligation to continue to disclose fees and have that compliant sort of chat all the time means that sometimes those meetings with clients become a compliance meeting, a discussion on fees rather than a discussion on the client, where they're going and so on. And, when people engage you, especially now where there's not that product conflict that exists between client, advisor, and product issuer. People know what they're paying their advisor, as they know what they're paying their accountant,
Yes.
and they know what they're paying their lawyer. Imagine being told that all the time, every time, and that's the basis for your relationship with your professional advisor. So, I think that there needs to be protections in place so that people know what they're paying. The disclosure is required. Conflicts need to be removed, but the continual focus on that all the time means that there's less of a focus on the value of the advice and the relationship that client's receiving.
It would become very focused on the
cost,
on the mechanics, the cost. When really people want to talk about their future and what they're trying to achieve and how do I get there. And from an advisor point of view, they would really love to just focus on the relationship. And as you said, it's not like they're trying to hide that. It just needs to be totally transparent and accessible. But doesn't need to be a dry legal conversation.
Most people, when they log in, they'll see it come out every month. They know what's happening there. But say most self-funded people, when they do retire, will need at least $1 million outside of their home. They've got a million reasons to seek advice and make sure it's done correctly. And, the percentage that someone pays for advice versus the risk of investing that sort of capital is their life savings. They can't go back to work. In the scheme of things is not that much for the risk management processes and the ability to sort of navigate some of these legislative issues so they have the optimal outcome when they do retire.
One other thing that you did touch on in the Livewire talk, I think you might have mentioned it before, you're talking about obviously not only are there trillions of dollars sitting in an asset pool, superannuation is huge, and in 20 years' time I think you said maybe 10 trillion. The numbers are astronomical, and that translates to, the per capita wealth of ranking us at possibly 4 in the world or something crazy like that.
Yeah, I think asset-wise, but then even per average household wealth, I think number one. I think we're currently second on median household wealth, which is the best measure, to Liechtenstein. And I joke about that. I think there's 5 people that live in Liechtenstein. So, it's not easy to get your per person numbers up with that. So, that's quite phenomenal already.
Yes.
And I think compounding takes care of that. I don't think $1 million, millionaires in 20 years won't be unusual.
And you talk about the people who started with the compulsory super contributions, Keating brings that in. There's now a group of people who've grown up with that. There must be a massive opportunity looking forward.
Oh, look, I think from if you're owning an advice practice, that you'd certainly want to be engaging with that generation, and you certainly want to be engaging with your clients if they're older, 65 plus, their kids, even if it's an education type process as well, because these asset pools will transfer at some point in time. If you look specifically at Gen Y, say would be the generation after my generation, have clearly been receiving, superannuation contributions as well, but at a much higher rate, that 9% plus, I think as it is, not correct me if I'm wrong, but something going to close to 12% soon. So, even a two-income family, that's a lot per annum in absolute dollars that's going in. Their parents might be close to, say, 70, and so they'll have assets that transfer. And a lot of people are even looking to transfer that now, that bank of mum and dad phenomenon that we're seeing. So, that giving while living from that generation. So, I think it's important to engage. 1, don't sell your practice, but 2, make sure you're talking to the right people for the future growth.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on the future of the industry. I think for many listeners, the idea of Australia becoming the luckiest country will be perhaps surprising. But of course, for anyone who knows you well, your viewpoint is unsurprisingly positive. So, thanks for coming in today. Always great to chat. Let's do it again soon.
Thanks a lot, Pete. Thanks for having me.
That's all for this episode of FM Radio. We hope you can join us again soon as we tune into another aspect of funds management that affects you and your clients. In closing, I'd just like to say that Elston acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and acknowledges their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to the people, the cultures and the elders, past, present and emerging. FM Radio was recorded at The Pod at Cutting Edge Studios, West End, Brisbane. It was hosted by Peter Goodall, and today's guest was Elston Co-Founder and Portfolio Manager Andrew McKie. For more FM radio episodes and full transcripts of the interviews, visit elston.com.au. And if you'd like to subscribe to our podcast series to make sure you don't miss a thing, you'll find FM radio on your favourite platforms, including Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. The information provided in this podcast is general in nature. You must consider your own circumstances prior to making any investment. For more information, go to elston.com.au or speak to your financial advisor. Elston Asset Management is authorised by EP Financial Services, AFSL number 325252.